Have you ever wondered whether the love he feels for you is genuine? Words can lie, but behavior carries deep truths that the conscious mind doesn't always recognize. Behind subtle gestures, meaningful silences, and seemingly ordinary actions lie hidden signs that reveal with almost surgical precision what truly lives in a man's heart. Authentic love doesn't proclaim itself with grand declarations. It slips in through small details, unconscious choices, and silent offerings. Carl Jung teaches that the human soul is revealed far more through symbols and deeds than through logical speech. In this video, we'll dive into the invisible signs that a man's unconscious lets slip when his feeling is real. Get ready to see with new eyes and decipher what he may not even know he's showing. Leave a comment. I recognize true love in small gestures. To understand the hidden signs of true love, it's essential to look beyond the surface and immerse yourself in the symbolic universe of the unconscious, as Carl Jung proposed. Jung believed that we are all driven by internal forces we often cannot grasp rationally. When a man truly loves, his psyche expresses this not only through words, but through symbolic gestures that convey deep unconscious content. One of Jung's central concepts is projection. When someone projects an unconscious part of themselves onto another, particularly in romantic relationships, it reveals aspects of their own inner world. A man in love tends to project his anima, the feminine archetype in his psyche, onto his partner. That means he sees in her not just a companion, but a bridge to his own soul. His behaviors then show how meaningful that connection is. Another fundamental concept is the shadow, the part of the personality the ego doesn't acknowledge and often represses. When a man begins to integrate his shadow, he becomes more authentic and vulnerable, and he starts acting from a truth that isn't based on performance but on genuine giving. That emotional transparency is a powerful indicator of real love. Finally, the process of individuation, the path towards psychic wholeness, leads a man to recognize and balance his inner feminine and masculine aspects. A man who truly loves is, even unconsciously, walking this path. He doesn't love to fill a void. He loves to share a journey of transformation. There is a silent language that speaks louder than any romantic declaration. It is through spontaneous gestures, small deviations from routine, and unprogrammed actions that the unconscious reveals what the heart has yet to name. According to Jung, behavior is often driven by internal forces beyond the ego's control. That means that very often, true love expresses itself not when he's trying to please, but when he acts without thinking, and that is the moment when the silent offerings occur. When a man truly loves, his unconscious begins to shape his conduct. He starts acting protectively, but without possessiveness. He listens attentively, not because he learned it's important, but because something within him genuinely values your existence. He makes himself present without expecting anything in return, simply because his soul feels the need to be near you. These attitudes, which he may not even realize he's performing, are direct reflections of internal content that transcend rational logic and connect with the symbol of an emotional bond. Jung teaches that the unconscious uses symbols, images, and patterns to communicate archetypal content. True love is a powerful archetype, and when it manifests, a man's psyche vibrates to a different rhythm. He shifts his priorities, adapts his routines, and becomes more flexible, all without being forced or asked. This isn't a conscious effort to please you, but an internal movement of connection. That's why these signs are often hard to decode. He might listen closely when you talk about something trivial, remember small details you never imagined he'd registered, or even offer help without you asking. All of these are ways his unconscious signals that you occupy a significant symbolic space in his life. Moreover, this kind of giving doesn't seek external recognition. He doesn't need to be seen as the perfect boyfriend or the ideal man. What drives these actions is an internal fidelity to the truth of his feelings. This ties directly into the concept of individuation. A man in love, even if he isn't fully aware, begins to align with the deepest parts of his psyche. Love pulls him inward, sparking subtle transformations that show up in acts he may not fully understand. That spontaneity also shines through in moments of silence. He may not always know what to say, but he'll be there by your side. Jung said that the soul reveals itself in what cannot be explained with words, and often it's a presence-filled silence that shows the depth of the bond. He may not say, "I love you," but he'll show it by choosing to listen, by changing plans to support you, by respecting your emotional space without demanding explanations. These are symbolic acts whose value goes far beyond the visible surface. It's also important to observe how he reacts in crises. A man who truly loves doesn't flee when discomfort arises. Even without knowing exactly what to do, he stays. That steadfastness, often silent, is an undeniable sign of emotional commitment. He remains not because it's convenient, but because something deeper keeps him by your side. It is in this resistance to escape that the true emotional bond reveals itself. Finally, when we speak of silent giving, we speak of a connection that cannot be explained, only felt. The unconscious knows before the rational mind, and when the feeling is real, it overflows through everyday gestures, uncalculated details, and spontaneous attention. A man who truly loves reveals it not by what he says, but by the things he does without realizing, because there lies his purest truth, free from the ego's defenses. True love demands courage, not just to love, but to show oneself. In a world that teaches men to hide their weaknesses, embracing one's vulnerability is a deeply symbolic, revealing act. When a man truly loves, he allows his shadow to emerge, and this gesture, often imperceptible at first glance, is one of the most authentic expressions of emotional giving. Carl Jung teaches that the shadow is everything the ego refuses to recognize as part of itself. But when an emotional bond is genuine, that barrier begins to crumble. Showing the shadow doesn't mean acting dysfunctionally or toxically, but permitting the other to see the imperfect parts, the ones that were rejected, forgotten, or repressed. A man who loves deeply begins to allow himself to be seen in his entirety, including his fears, insecurities, unresolved anger, and unexpressed sorrow. He stops trying to sustain an idealized self-image and starts revealing who he really is. This movement usually isn't a conscious choice, but is guided by an inner force seeking true connection. Jung believed that it is in confronting the shadow that the real individuating process begins. This applies powerfully in relationships. When a man starts to love, he is challenged to look within himself. The presence of the beloved acts like a mirror, bringing hidden contents to light. He may react with surprise, resistance, or even fear. But when the feeling is real, he stays in the process. He doesn't run away or hide behind masks for too long. He may retreat for a moment, but he comes back, because unconsciously, he knows that love is the only safe space where he can rebuild himself. Vulnerability shows itself in subtle ways. It's in those moments when he admits he doesn't have all the answers, when he confesses a mistake without defending himself, or when he shares a painful memory he has never verbalized. These are profound signs that he is not merely trying to please, but that he is allowing the relationship to serve as a symbolic space for healing. By revealing his shadow, he is essentially trusting that you will look beyond it. This doesn't mean he will become emotionally dependent or disclose everything at once. The giving of vulnerability is gradual, but you can tell when it's real. It isn't about dramatics or strategic confessions, but those moments when his gaze shifts, his voice wavers, his armor drops for a few seconds. And those instants speak more about what he feels than 1,000 rehearsed words ever could. In this context, love becomes a bridge, a link between who he is and who he is becoming. A man who truly loves, even unconsciously, uses this bond as a catalyst for his own individuation. He begins to see himself more honestly and deeply because affection takes him out of the center of his own ego. He no longer needs to protect himself all the time. He allows himself to be seen. It's also common that once he exposes his shadow, he acts with greater empathy. When he acknowledges his own pain, he comes to understand yours more fully, and that deepens the bond. He doesn't just love what's beautiful in you, but also your flaws, your fears, your shadow zones. Because he too has begun to accept his own. This mirroring is one of the most beautiful aspects of a conscious love journey. Finally, it's important to understand that the emergence of the shadow in a relationship is not a sign of weakness, but of truth. When he shows himself as imperfect, he is actually demonstrating trust. He allows you to see who he really is, not because he wants to seem special, but because love has awakened in him the courage to be whole. And that silent, courageous giving is one of the greatest signs that the feeling is real. To love truly is more than to feel. It is to sustain. And few signs reveal as much about the authenticity of a bond as constant, silent, attentive presence. Carl Jung shows us that individuation is not a final state, but an ongoing journey toward the wholeness of the self. Along this path, the way someone shows up in a relationship reveals how committed he is not only to the other, but to himself. When a man loves deeply, he brings himself fully, even though he is still a work in progress. Conscious presence is different from simple physical availability. It means being emotionally accessible, attentive to the relationship's currents, sensitive to what is said, and also to what is not. True listening is one of the highest expressions of mature love. A man who listens with his body, his gaze, and his soul shows that you occupy a symbolic space within him. And this only happens when the feeling is genuine. This kind of presence is not performative. It is not tied to exaggerated demonstrations or attempts to impress. It is a calm, steady presence that holds even when there is no great excitement, even on ordinary days, even when life demands more than the heart can give. Jung would say that this posture reflects an ego in dialogue with the self, that is, a part of the man already in reconciliation with his psychic center. This makes him more capable of inhabiting relational spaces with maturity. Consistency also shows up in how he handles his partner's emotional cycles. The man who truly loves doesn't vanish when there is sadness, doesn't shut down when there is conflict, and doesn't run away when he feels challenged. He stays, and that staying is not born of convenience but of choice. Even when he doesn't fully understand what's happening, he chooses to be there, to listen, to accompany. That is his soul saying in silence, "I am with you." In this context, listening becomes a ritual of connection. When he listens, he says, "Your feelings matter more to me than my ready-made answers." And here one of the deepest signs of true love is revealed, the desire to understand, even when there is no immediate solution. Jung saw relationships as a path to individuation because it is in encountering the other that we are called to grow. Listening, in this sense, is more than hearing. It is allowing the other's existence to transform us. This listening also honors silences. A man who loves doesn't insist on you explaining yourself all the time or try to fix your pain with stock phrases. He understands that some wounds cannot be verbalized, yet he stays. That ability to hold what is unsaid reveals a rare emotional depth. He doesn't try to be a hero. He becomes human by your side, and it is precisely this shared humanity that builds the solid foundation of real love. Consistency and presence can also be seen in everyday details. In the commitments he honors without being reminded, in the moments he anticipates your needs without expecting recognition, in the care he takes with your emotional spaces, respecting your pauses without invading or disappearing. Every small, continuous act of attention confirms his feelings, because no one sustains that kind of presence out of obligation. Only someone connected from within remains. This connection doesn't eliminate conflicts, but it changes how they are experienced. A man on the path of individuation doesn't need to win an argument. He wants to understand what lies beneath it. He doesn't need to prove he's right. He wants to preserve the relationship's integrity. And above all, he recognizes that the bond is a mirror in which he sees his own contradictions, and he doesn't shy away from that. Finally, it's important to realize that this kind of presence doesn't stem from effort, but from harmony. When love is true, the soul finds rest in listening and consistency, and a man who allows himself this movement reveals, even in silence, that he's walking the path of emotional maturity, a path that doesn't seek perfection but truth, and that truth shows itself day after day in how he stays. True love can only flourish when there is internal space for it, and that space expands as a man recognizes and integrates his deepest, most sensitive and intuitive dimension, his anima. Carl Jung teaches us that every man carries within him the feminine archetype, his anima, and it is the integration of this inner aspect that makes an authentic romantic relationship possible, one without domination or neediness, but one of genuine meeting. When a man begins to love truly, one of the deepest signs lies in how he engages with this inner feminine, whether he acknowledges her, honors her, and allows her to guide his actions. A man in touch with his anima shows attitudes that go beyond logic, control, and rigidity. He opens himself to feeling, to emotional listening, and to deep empathy. He begins to see the relationship not as a territory to conquer, but as a sacred field of transformation. And this shows in how he relates to you. It's not just about how he treats you, but how he regards the feminine you represent in his psyche. He doesn't see you as an extension of himself or an idealized image. He recognizes you as other, as a mirror, as an inner guide. This recognition appears quietly and gradually. He starts to value affection more than power. He opens up to deep conversations even when they make him uncomfortable. He becomes more careful with his words, more present in his listening, more sensitive to what unfolds between you on subtle levels. That doesn't mean he becomes submissive, but that he learns to balance strength with tenderness. Integrated masculinity doesn't need to prove itself. It sustains, it welcomes, it builds together. The presence of the anima also shows when a man begins to question his inherited patterns. He revisits his beliefs about masculinity, reinterprets what it means to love, and abandons defensive postures that once protected him from feeling. True love, when it reaches that depth, is not comfortable. It is transformative, and only a man in contact with his internal feminine can cross that threshold with integrity. He doesn't reject the impact you have on his soul. He accepts that it changes him, and instead of resisting, he lets himself be moved. A clear sign that he has integrated part of his anima is his ability to handle emotions without despair or denial. He isn't afraid to cry, to apologize, or to admit he's lost. He doesn't fear appearing fragile because he has already understood that his strength lies in truth. Jung said the anima mediates the relationship between the ego and the self. That is, she leads a man to the center of himself. When a man truly falls in love and is ready to love, this process accelerates. You become, without realizing it, part of the most intimate journey he can live. Furthermore, integrating the anima brings a deep respect for his partner's individuality. He no longer tries to mold, control, or correct her. He allows her to be, and more. He values her perspective, her intuition, her wisdom. He begins to realize that when he listens to you, he's hearing something his ego has not yet accessed. That doesn't mean he'll agree with everything you say, but that he will take your words seriously, not as advice but as revelations. His sexuality also transforms. It ceases to be merely instinct or a search for pleasure, becoming instead a space for symbolic communion. He cares more about connection than performance. He wants to touch your body, but also your soul. That is anima in action, the desire for spiritual fusion through matter, total meeting of two essences. Finally, when a man honors his anima, he doesn't see love as something that completes him, but as something that reveals him. He understands that to love is not to possess, but to share. And his way of being in the relationship reflects that. He doesn't compete, he doesn't hide, he doesn't manipulate, he walks beside you. And on that walk he reveals, in gestures, silences, and choices, that he has already begun reconciling his masculine with the feminine within him, and that you, as a woman, are a sacred part of this journey. True love doesn't announce itself with rehearsed speeches. It reveals itself silently in spontaneous gestures, in exposed vulnerabilities, in attentive listening, and in constant presence. In the light of Carl Jung's analytical psychology, we learn that what a man feels for you is expressed less by what he says and more by what he cannot help but show. It is in how he lets himself be transformed by the bond, in how much he allows his shadow to surface, in the respect he offers your individuality, and above all in the space he opens within himself to integrate the feminine, that the deepest proof of real love resides. Every attitude, every silence laden with meaning, every choice he makes without seeking recognition, these all reveal that you already inhabit his psyche symbolically, and when that happens, there's no turning back. Love is no longer a game, but a path of individuation. If this content touched you in some way, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Don't forget to leave your comment with the phrase, "I recognize true love in small gestures." And watch the video appearing on your screen now. It may deepen your journey of transformation even further.